Welcome to the California Garden August Garden Tour. In today's episode, we have a lot of harvests, things for you to do, and many gardening tips and tricks. So let's begin with the garden tour, starting with our raised beds. In the first raised bed, we have a lot of onions growing, as you can see on the left side. We have a lot of bunching onions as well as large onions that are doing quite well. And we have some volunteer gourd plants. Now this is most likely an ash gourd plant. It hasn't produced any gourds yet, so we'll know soon. And then on the other side we have some eggplants. These are the green eggplants. And right in between them you can see the loofahs that are growing on the trellis. And early morning, it's a wonderful sight. You can see beautiful loofah flowers that are blooming and a lot of pollinators. And from the other side you can see on the same bed a closer look at the green eggplants, which are growing quite well now. And we also have this icebox watermelon that has one watermelon growing right now and will be ready for harvest anytime soon. And the trellis that's been completely occupied by the loofahs. And you can see the view of the trellis between the two raised beds. And this design helped us utilize a lot of space in our garden very efficiently. You can see how high the trellis is. It looks beautiful. And on the other bed, the second bed, we have a lot of okras on the right side. As you can see, they have grown quite large, the emerald okra variety. And we are also trying out growing some kidney beans that you see towards the center, as well as some peanuts towards the far end, and a couple of tropical melons. On the third bed, we have a lot of pepper plants, different pepper varieties, interplanted with a lot of flowers, the marigolds that are looking beautiful now. And we have a lot of ridge gourd plants that are climbing onto the trellis. You can see a zucchini plant towards the end of this bed, and a lot of other pepper varieties, as I mentioned. So the third bed is a combination of a lot of peppers and some ridge gourd plants that are climbing on the trellis. You can see a view of the trellis between the third and the fourth raised bed. It looks quite beautiful, and once again, very good utilization of our space. And on the fourth bed, we have our tomatoes interplanted with lettuce. The lettuce plants have now bolted, as you can see, not looking that good. But the tomato plants, they are growing quite strong still. I did have to spray the tomato plants with neem oil to get rid of the spider mites. And on the fifth bed, the final bed, we have a Romanesco plant, followed by our longevity spinach and some butternut squash plants. Now the butternut squash plant is producing a butternut squash. As you can see, it's hiding inside the leaves. And we expect to get a lot more squashes from this butternut squash plant. And then we have the sunchokes plant. We had to trim down the sunchoke plant because it had grown quite large. And you can see on the other side we have some taro plants. These taro plants will be ready for harvest sometime in September, I think. And on the back we have our ivy gourd plants. And that completes the tour of our raised beds. Let's now move on to the containers. In the containers we have turkey berry, curry leaf, and the goji berry plant that we planted in larger containers. We also added some mulch. We then have the Java plum, which is an extremely delicious berry. And we don't know yet whether this is going to fruit, so we kept it in this whiskey barrel container for it to grow for some time and also mulched it. We have two eggplant varieties. On the left we have the Black Beauty eggplant, and on the right we have the Amethyst eggplant. Both of them are excellent producers. They give us a lot of eggplants this season. We then have the pole beans plant. Now the pole beans produced abundantly this season, but I had to spray the leaves with neem oil to get rid of the spider mites again, and I removed all the affected leaves. We have the radish plant. These are the white long radish seeds that we just sowed, followed by the Malabar spinach plant, which is growing on the large trellis, the container trellis, and is vining out now into several vines, as you can see. We have the Indian eggplant variety. This is an eggplant that I bought from a farmer's market in Torrance, California. If you know this farmer's market, it's pretty amazing. We have the baby baba okra. This is a dwarf okra variety. And if you look at the way this okra plant has taken over, there are a lot of plants in this one whiskey barrel container, and it's still producing abundantly, although they are growing very close to each other. We have the pumpkin plant, our sugar baby pumpkin, that has vined all the way on the sides now. Followed by the hyacinth beans. This is a vining type hyacinth bean plant. Extremely abundant producer, has produced a lot of hyacinth beans this month. And as you can see, the trellis, it's growing on this container trellis that was placed inside the whiskey barrel. And even then, the plant has outgrown this 7-foot long trellis. And as you can see, the vines are now reaching out for the skies. We have the Anaheim chili peppers, one of the most productive pepper varieties I've grown, has produced abundantly this season. Followed by the cantaloupe plant or the muskmelon. There are a lot of melons, as you can see, towards the bottom of the container, and there are some at the back as well. We sowed some carrot seeds in this container. They have just germinated, so we'll see how this one goes. We have the black beauty zucchini that we planted in this container. You can plant 2 in 1 whiskey barrel container. We have the millionaire eggplant. This is one of our most productive eggplants too. It produced abundantly this month and continues to produce high quality eggplants that are absolutely delicious. The Nombo giant okra, it's towards the end of its season. However, I saved a few pods so that they mature on the plant and I can save the seeds. So I've been saving seeds of this organically grown Nombo giant okra so that I can use it for years to come. And finally, we have the mint plant that was transplanted into this whiskey barrel container. It's slightly larger and there's a lot of mint on this plant. And now let's look at our green stalk planter, something that I had reviewed in my previous episode. And it's a great quality planter. You can see the Japanese eggplants, they're producing heavily in this planter now. And we've planted peppers, tomatoes. You can see some tomatoes and some strawberries, chilies. And on the other side, we have this another slicing type tomato variety that's producing quite well now. And some herbs as well. So currently the green stalk planter helps us grow all these lovely plants in a very small space. And now let's look at all the harvests we made this month, beginning with basil. This Thai basil plant was growing in our herb container and produced a lot of basil. And basil will go to bolt during the hot summer months, so just make sure you harvest all your basil in time as soon as they grow. And you can even pinch off the flowers that come on the top. That will make the plant focus on producing lovely greens, as you can see here. Pole beans. This was one of our most abundant producers this month. The pole bean plant has the benefit of being spread out over a large area, as you can see here. And there are loads of beans on this plant, and we started harvesting them early this month, and we were harvesting them almost throughout the month. Now, one thing you do need to be careful about pole beans is that spider mites do attack this plant. You can see the beans here, they look beautiful though. So when the spider mites attack the plant, you need to make sure that you're spraying water every few days to keep the area moist. And also apply some neem oil, spray with neem oil or the Dr. Earth garden insecticide. And I'll post links to these products in the product description as well as the pinned comments. But the pole bean was one of our more abundant producers. It did produce a lot of pole beans, as you can see here, in a relatively small space. So if you have the space to set up a trellis to grow beans vertically, I think the pole beans is a great option compared to bush beans. Because bush beans do produce a lot, but not as abundantly as the pole beans. And you can see here the pole beans, they just keep growing these vines on the trellis or the supporting structure, and it will give you a lot of beans that you can harvest for quite some time. Now ideally in Southern California weather, pole beans grow up to December once you plant them. They grow through fall and even into the early days of winter. But that is if your plant survives all the elements and all the insects that attack them. So make sure you're watching your bean plant, and if you see any kind of discoloration on the leaves, try to protect the leaves by spraying them with any kind of insecticide or neem oil or any other product that will help you prevent spider mites on the plant. And once again, you can see just in a few days the beans have regrown into larger pods, and you do have to keep an eye on these beans because they grow quite quickly. Here is the bean plant a few days later, and you can see a lot of pods here, but also the spider mite damage on the leaves is pretty evident. So if you see leaves like these which are dry, and if you turn the leaves over, you can see some small red colored mites, make sure that you remove the leaves and you spray your plant. What we did is we harvested all the remaining pods on the plant and then removed all the affected leaves as well and give the plant a chance to grow back. And we'll see if the plant is not growing fast enough, we might even replace it with some other plant. So we'll just have to wait and see how this plant performs. And here you can see the harvest, the beans harvest, it looks pretty good. Moving on to beets. We have the Detroit dark red beets that we were growing in this raised bed. You can see the beets, they are beautiful, large beets. And although beets are a cool season crop, we were able to harvest a few beets even during the summer season. You can see one more beet here. So the only reason we planted beets back in May or June is because we were just starting out our garden and we wanted to plant a different variety of vegetables. And you can see the beets, they did quite well. The size of the beets is also quite large despite it being summer, and they were absolutely flavorful and delicious. So in places like Southern California, Zone 9, Zone 10, you can easily grow beets around the year. And you can see after they've been washed, these beets look beautiful and the roots were quite large. And what did we do with our beets and tomatoes? We made a delicious beet tomato soup. And cilantro was growing in our green stalk planter. We harvested a lot of cilantro from our green stalk planter. But the bulk of the cilantro that we harvested this season was growing indoors. We were growing these cilantro plants indoors under grow lights. If you grow them indoors, they don't bolt, the temperature is controlled, the nutrients are controlled, and we used some very high quality potting mix with worm castings that resulted in these beautiful plants that you can see. And we never ran out of cilantro during the last month or two. You can see we've been harvesting a lot of cilantro, and no matter how much we cut back, the plant keeps growing. And what did we do with our cilantro? We made some cilantro chutney. Just stir fry the cilantro with some spices and then grind it into a paste like you see here. It results in a beautiful, delicious cilantro chutney. And we also harvested some corn that was growing in our whiskey barrel container. We had a lot of corn plants growing in this whiskey barrel container. And you can see here the cobs have very nice kernels. And this is what you want to see. If your corn is nicely pollinated, you should have a nice set of kernels inside your corn cobs. And on an average, one corn plant will produce about 2 or 3 nice sized cobs, at least when growing in containers. You might get larger plants if you grow them in the ground. But for the amount of corn that we consume, I think this was a very great solution to grow about 6 plants in this one whiskey barrel container. And you can look at the corn cobs, they look absolutely amazing. You need to wait for the corn silks to dry before you harvest them. And you can just pull back on the outer husk to reveal the corn kernels to see how nicely the kernels have formed. And in this case, the kernels have formed quite well. Moving on to the Japanese cucumber. This was the first time we were growing our Japanese cucumber. And I wasn't too happy growing this cucumber variety. It had a lot of disease issues. You can see the cucumber is not very well formed. So all in all, I think I won't be growing this cucumber variety in the future, but we still got a few cucumbers from this plant. Edamame or soybeans. For us, it was the first time growing soybeans at home. And you can see the pods are looking quite good once they're ready for harvest. And the soybean plant is a little tough to grow for most homeowners. And that's because of all the disease problems that come with soybeans. because soybeans is a plant that's very high in nutrition value. A lot of bugs like the plant, as well as a lot of fungal disease affect the plant. So in our case, the biggest problem we had with our soybean plants was rust, the fungal disease that affects soybeans a lot. And due to this, the plant didn't grow very large. However, even in this small container, we got a lot of soybeans, and I was quite happy with that. Each soybean plant will produce several pods. You can see here there are a lot of pods around the plant. And once you harvest the pods and shell them, the soybeans are inside. So overall in this container, in a small space, I was still quite pleased with the number of soybeans that were produced. But soybeans are so delicious that you're going to consume a lot of them. So you need to grow a lot of soybean plants to keep consuming the soybeans. But the soybean pods are absolutely nice looking, very delicious to eat as well. You can see here, this is our harvest from our containers. And we were also growing soybeans on our raised beds. Now the soybeans that were growing on the raised beds weren't too healthy for some reason. And you can see the pods here, they still produced a decent amount of pods, not a whole lot. But from the few plants that were growing, we were able to collect some pods and then add it to our collection of the ones that we were growing in the container. Now once you shell the soybeans, you can see the actual soybeans or edamame inside. And this little cover that surrounds it will be gone once you cook them. But you can see the pods have nicely formed soybeans, and this is what you want when you harvest your soybean pods. And how do we use our edamame or soybeans? We put them in a container, add some salt, and then drizzle in some oil. Now you don't have to use a lot of oil, we just use a little bit and then mix it up. We mix it up very well, and then we add it to our air fryer. This Utopia air fryer is one of the best investments I've made. It helps you cook a lot of foods with minimal amounts of oil, and we just air fry this for about 20 to 30 minutes. And I'll post a link to this product as well in the comments and product description. This is an excellent quality fryer. I've been using it for quite some time. In between frying, just take out your soybeans, just give it a nice shake, and then leave it on for about 5-10 minutes more. And once that's done, you can see very high quality soybeans. These are absolutely delicious if you cook it this way. So you must try this out. So I hope you get to try out cooking your edamame in this way. And the pods do absorb all the flavor, all the oil and salt makes very delicious edamame. So I hope you try it out. Moving on to our eggplant harvest, we had the amethyst eggplant that was growing in this whiskey barrel container. And this amethyst eggplant has been growing since about a year now. So it has grown through winter and through this season and still going strong. And what I usually do with eggplants is that during fall at around September, I'll remove the whole plant and then prune the roots as well as the stems and then replant them so that they can stay through winter and into the next season. You can see the eggplants here, they look quite beautiful, the classic amethyst color. And this is also a very abundant producer. Every few days this month, we were able to harvest some eggplants, which goes to show how prolific this eggplant variety is. And this eggplant also did not have a lot of diseases and no insects as well on the plant. So overall, I was quite pleased growing this eggplant throughout the season, and it's still going strong. So as I mentioned, I might just prune and replant this eggplant in September so that it grows and then stays dormant through winter and is ready for the next season. And the eggplants themselves are quite large on this plant, as you can see. They range from small to large. So overall, it's a very good mix of eggplants, and those are absolutely delicious. The Black Beauty eggplant was another eggplant variety that we were growing in the whiskey barrel container. And this eggplant is quite large compared to most other eggplants. And we were able to harvest eggplants every few days from this one plant. And you can see we have 3 eggplants that are ready for harvest in just a few days since we harvested the first one. This eggplant is great for cooking projects where you need large amounts of eggplant. And you can see here the eggplants, they look quite beautiful. So excellent harvest from this Black Beauty eggplant. The millionaire eggplant was another eggplant variety we were growing. This is a Japanese type eggplant, long eggplants, quite big as well. And we were able to harvest a few eggplants from this one plant. And there are still a lot of eggplants here. So you can see the eggplant is not only long, but it's also quite large. You can see 2 eggplants that we harvested. And there are several more eggplants growing in this container. There are some that we are harvesting now, and there are some that are in between inside the container. You can see here, quite large eggplants. And there are several more eggplants inside the container as well as on the other side, which you can't see from this camera angle. But there are a lot of eggplants on these 2 eggplants that are growing in this whiskey barrel container. And once again, on several days, we were able to harvest a lot of these eggplants. Beautiful looking eggplants, absolutely delicious as well. Figs. We were growing this mission fig in a container. We have now started growing all our large trees in containers. And the mission fig is very highly rated, and it has a taste rating of 10 out of 10, which ranks very high when it comes to fig taste. This fig variety grows like a monster in California. It's a very vigorous, fast growing variety. So I highly recommend that if you're growing figs in the California weather, that you grow mission figs. This does become a large tree, so please be aware of that. It's not a dwarf variety like the Celestial fig, for example. The Celestial fig is a dwarf variety that just grows to about 5 feet or 6 feet. But this mission fig will grow large, but also yield very high quality figs that are extremely good in taste, much better than most fig varieties. Pineapple ground cherries. It was a final harvest for our pineapple ground cherries. They had reached the end of their life and season, and they dropped a lot of pineapple ground cherries on the ground. And as I mentioned in my previous monthly episode as well, the pineapple ground cherry is an excellent ground cover that you can grow on your raised beds. It drops all these cherries, beautiful looking cherries, on the ground, and that's when you pick them up. And you can see here the plant is now towards the end of life. You can see the leaves are turning yellow, and they have yielded a lot of pineapple ground cherries already. So we've been harvesting these cherries for the past 2 months, maybe 3. But it has been an abundant harvest from these plants, and this is how these pineapple ground cherries look like. We harvested quite a lot of pineapple ground cherries almost every few days, and this is how they look like after they are shelled. And hyacinth bean was another great producer in the garden. We harvested a lot of hyacinth beans from this vining type hyacinth bean that was growing in our container in this one whiskey barrel. And you can see the plant has taken up almost all of the trellis. And this is how the hyacinth bean produces beans in clusters. Beautiful looking clusters. The vining type bean is a more prolific variety compared to the bush type. You can see these large clusters of beans that are produced by this hyacinth bean plant. And at a time we were harvesting about 2 or 3 bunches of these hyacinth beans. They were growing quite well. And remember, this hyacinth bean plant is growing in just one whiskey barrel container, and there are just 2 plants, and they've taken up the whole trellis. Now once you harvest the hyacinth beans from the bunch, you just separate it out to get all the individual hyacinth beans. And hyacinth beans must be cooked before they are eaten. It's very important to cook them. They can't be eaten raw like the other beans. So make sure if you're growing hyacinth beans that you cook them very well with spices. You can boil them with salt. There are a lot of different ways to cook them. And once we removed all the hyacinth beans, you can see that there are a lot of hyacinth beans that we harvested. And how did we use the hyacinth beans? We stir-fried it with spices and mustard seeds and added some coconut, and we got a great tasting hyacinth bean dish. Moving on to our ivy gourd harvest, we have a lot of ivy gourds growing in our ivy gourd bed. And you can see here they were producing quite a lot of ivy gourds this month. And the ivy gourd is another plant that loves the summer. So as long as you have good hot weather, the ivy gourd plant will keep producing ivy gourds. Now the trellis for this ivy gourd is not the best that we would have liked, and we might change this to a newer trellis next month or maybe after the season is over. But you can see here the hyacinth bean plant, but you can see here the ivy gourd plant, it produced a lot of ivy gourds right throughout the month. And also we were harvesting these ivy gourds every few days. So all in all, a very abundant producer, something that I highly recommend that you grow in your home garden. Moving on to lettuce. We had lettuce right between our tomato beds, and some of the lettuce had bolted, as you can see here. Now you can either save the seeds for those lettuce plants or just consume them, just the leaves. And the green lettuce, as you can see, we are harvesting the leaves. Now you can start harvesting the leaves from the bottom. These are the larger leaves. You can see here the leaves, they look absolutely amazing. And these lettuce are absolutely flavorful as well. We made a lot of very interesting dishes with this lettuce. We used this lettuce for a lot of our salads, and they were absolutely delicious. And moving on to mint, we had our mint growing in this large whiskey barrel container, which we eventually transplanted into an even larger one. But you can see all the mint leaves, they look quite fresh, quite nice. And mint can be used in a lot of ways in your home. We usually make mint chutney, which is mint added with coconut and then ground up into a nice paste. And it tastes quite good. You can even use it to make cocktails, chutneys, almost anything that you can think of. Fresh mint is just amazing to have on hand in your garden. Let us know how you use your mint. If you have mint growing in the garden, let us know what is the best use that you think that mint has. And now let's move on to the okras that we harvested, beginning with baby baba okra. Now the baby baba okra was growing in this whiskey barrel container, and as you can see, it has totally taken over the whiskey barrel. And it produces okras in these clusters around the top, as you can see. And these are extremely high quality okras for the compact amount of space this plant takes. So we've been harvesting our baby baba okras quite regularly from this one container, and we've eventually gotten a lot of okras. Now the baby baba okra doesn't grow into a huge plant like the regular okra, but it still produces a lot of okra. You can see there are clusters of okra around the plant, and these okras are not only well formed, they are absolutely delicious as well. And they are spineless, not many spines on this okra if you're concerned about that. But for the compact size, the baby baba okra is one of the better okras to grow, especially if you're limited for space. And I think I overplanted. I planted them too close in the container, but they still did a good job of producing some very lovely okra. And although all the okras are not ready at once, you can keep harvesting okra from this plant as they mature. So all in all, I think I'll highly recommend the baby baba okra for anyone who's looking to grow okra in a smaller space. And here's the harvest. It looks beautiful, very nice looking okra. And now let's move on to the emerald okra, the okra that we were growing on our raised beds. And this okra is a very delicious okra variety. The plant is not that prolific. It's okay, but it wasn't as prolific as the other okra varieties we were growing. And you can see the okra. We harvested a lot of okra though because we had a lot of plants growing on our raised beds, and it gave us a lot of okra. You can see here the okra is somewhat smaller than the other okra varieties, but it's also very delicious. The emerald okra has a very nice taste, something that sets it apart from all the other okra varieties, but it's also a little difficult plant to grow. So I think from next year onwards I might try other okra varieties, not the emerald, but more of the other varieties that I grew this year, plus some new varieties that I will try out. And remember everyone, gardening is always a joy when you try out different things, see how the results are, and then see what works best for you. So if one okra variety doesn't work, just try another one. See what works best for your climate, for your area, and you'll know the answer. Here's a close-up of the okra. They look quite nice. And now let's look at the Nombo Giant okra harvest we made this month. Our Nombo Giant okras, which are pretty large in size, were growing in this whiskey barrel container. We were growing 4 plants. And you can see here the okras are so large and so heavy that the stems actually start bending over once this plant produces the okras. So we didn't harvest all the okras. We did harvest a lot of tender ones though, and we left the rest so that we could save and collect seeds from them. And what we also did is we trimmed all the stems. We cut the stems off at the top so that the plant is more manageable, because these had grown to like 8 to 10 foot tall plants. And you can see here the okras, they are quite large and they're very delicious as well. And this is an heirloom organic okra variety. You can see here the okras, they look quite good. And they can grow to a large size and still be tender. That's the best thing about the Nombo giant okra, is that they are tender even when they are at such a large size. And that's why it gets the name Nombo giant. Now this plant is susceptible to some kinds of insects and diseases, but all in all it's a great okra variety to grow in your home garden. And what did we do with the okra? We chopped it up, we shallow fried it with some chili powder, turmeric powder and salt. And this kind of a shallow fried okra is absolutely delicious. You can also deep fry them if you like it that way. But this is how we prepare our okra most of the time. Just cook them till they are slightly brown and they make an absolutely great dish. So all we have here is oil, mustard seeds, okra, chili powder, turmeric powder and salt. And this makes for a great okra dish. And moving on to Anaheim chili peppers. Our Anaheim chili peppers were growing in a container, in a whiskey barrel, and it has been one of the most productive peppers we've grown this season. As you can see, in a compact space in just one whiskey barrel container, it's producing a lot of awesome looking peppers. And this is when it turns red. And you can harvest them green as well. We harvested some green and some red. Now the Anaheim chili peppers, they're not too hot, but they do have a nice bit of heat to it. And they taste excellent when you just grill them or just shallow fry them. They taste just amazing. And Anaheim chili peppers are beginning to be one of my favorites just because they produce abundantly and they also are a good combination between heat and taste. So you can see all these peppers that we're harvesting from our container. We did have a lot of peppers all around the container almost all of this month, and we harvested quite a lot of peppers. Now the Anaheim chili pepper is also one variety that's a little resistant to pests and diseases. And it also looks pretty good. The plant looks very healthy and it also produces a lot of peppers. So all in all, I think I will be growing the Anaheim chili peppers a lot more, just because of the fact that it's so prolific. It is easy to grow and it produces a lot of peppers that are also delicious. And you can look at the harvest here. We harvested a lot of peppers and we were harvesting these peppers almost all around the season. So all in all, a very great harvest. Let's now move on to bell peppers. This is our Bonnie green bell pepper plant, which is very productive. You can see a lot of peppers on this plant. The peppers are not only looking very good, they also taste very good. And these are quite large peppers, as you can see. The bell peppers, although not one of the easiest to grow, this green Bonnie bell pepper plant was one of the better pepper varieties that we grew. And I think these sweet green peppers are not that easy to grow. However, this particular variety did a good job. It grew quite well. The pepper plant seems to be healthy. And the peppers were decently sized, quite good quality peppers. And one thing that made a huge difference for me growing peppers this year was worm tea. I did use worm tea on all my pepper plants every 15 days, and I think it made a huge difference in the quality of the peppers that I was harvesting. You can see the peppers here, they look quite good, and we were able to harvest quite a lot of peppers from just one plant. So all in all, it was a great pepper harvest. Moving on to the bird's eye chili pepper, the hot pepper that we were growing. We harvested quite a lot of peppers from this plant as well. This plant was absolutely loaded with peppers. You saw this plant in the previous monthly episode as well. Quite a lot of peppers that were growing on this plant. So we eventually harvested a lot of peppers And we also sun-dried some of these peppers so that we could make chili powder out of it. But once again, this was a very prolific pepper variety that produced a lot of hot peppers. Moving on to candy cane peppers. This is the first year we were trying to grow candy cane peppers, and I was pleasantly surprised. These peppers are sweet peppers, so they taste very much like the green bell peppers. They do have a candy cane striped appearance to them. That's what makes them unique. And they also taste good. So pretty looking peppers, almost snack sized peppers that look like candy canes and sweet in taste. So I don't think you could ask for more. And what I also noticed is that this particular pepper variety has a very compact plant. You can see these candy cane peppers, they turn from green to yellow to red. They have a very striking appearance, and you can see this one plant that was loaded with peppers. We harvested all the peppers from this plant. And the candy cane pepper is something I might consider growing once again, just because of the fact that it was a very prolific pepper variety. Now, all pepper plants do have problems with spider mites and aphids and whatnot in zone 10 because the weather is quite hot here. But you can see the candy cane pepper harvest. This looks pretty amazing. Moving on to our cayenne peppers. This is an organic heirloom cayenne pepper variety that we've been growing for many years now. I've been saving seeds for this pepper variety just because it's a very prolific pepper variety. These pepper seeds were given to me by a friend years ago, and since then I've been preserving these seeds because this plant is a monster producer. It produces a lot of cayenne peppers. In fact, this plant that you see here is actually a 3-year-old plant. I've overwintered this plant and preserved it for 3 years now. And you can see the stem, it's quite thick. And I completely pruned this pepper plant and it produced new shoots and also produced a load of peppers that you can see here. So all in all, a very prolific pepper variety. Moving on to the giant Marconi peppers. This is one pepper variety that I was growing for the first time this year, and I was pleasantly surprised. This is a monster pepper variety. The peppers are huge. They taste amazing. Once again, more like the sweet bell peppers. But the size of these giant Marconis are simply unbelievable. They are quite large peppers and they can be used for a lot of purposes. You can stuff them, you can grill them, you can use them in a wide variety of dishes. So I'm very happy with this pepper variety, which I will grow again soon. Hot banana peppers. This is another one of my favorite varieties just because the plant is very prolific and the peppers look amazing. They are a little hotter than most other sweet peppers. So what we do with these peppers is we dip them in batter and then we fry them and they taste absolutely amazing. So the hot banana peppers is another variety that I will definitely grow once again. Very prolific peppers that are easy to grow. Jalapeno peppers. These are the hot jalapeno peppers, and again one of my favorite pepper varieties just because of its nice heat value. It is a hot pepper, extremely hot if you're not used to hot peppers, but I love these peppers. This pepper plant is also an excellent producer. You can see a very short pepper plant that has a lot of jalapenos on it. So this is the early flame jalapeno, which is another one of my favorites. I will definitely be growing this jalapeno pepper variety once again next year, just because the peppers are very delicious, hot peppers, and the plant is nice and compact and still produces a lot of jalapenos. And jalapeno peppers also taste very good. They have a very unique taste, and if you like jalapenos, you'll love this jalapeno pepper variety. And now let's move on to pumpkins. We had this one pumpkin plant that was growing in the whiskey barrel container that had sent out vines on both sides. This is the first pumpkin that we harvested. This is the sugar baby pumpkin. Very beautiful looking pumpkin. And on the other side, we had one more pumpkin growing. So you can see it's almost ripe and can be harvested at this stage. Strawberries. We were growing strawberries in our strawberry tower that I had shown you in one of our previous monthly episodes. And we were getting a lot of strawberries. So this kind of a structure is great to grow strawberries. You can easily harvest the strawberries without them touching the dirt. And last but not the least, tomatoes. Now we were growing a lot of tomato varieties on our raised bed, And you can see here the harvest, they look quite good. These are the large tomatoes by Bonnie Plants. And this was probably one of the biggest tomatoes we grew in our garden this year. And that yielded a lot of tomatoes, as you can see. Now I like to keep the tomatoes for ripening on the vine. This way they taste the best. However, if you have problems with rodents or squirrels in your area, then you can harvest your tomatoes a little sooner and then ripen them on the shelf, and they do equally well. So from the big tomatoes, other than the Bonnie tomato variety, we also had the salsa tomato variety. The salsa tomato variety is also a very prolific tomato variety. And this is a part of the Harvest Select series, again by Bonnie Plants. These are usually available at Home Depot, the plants. And since we were starting our garden very late this year, we actually got the plants instead of sowing the seeds. But as you can see here, the plants did really well. And we got an abundant harvest of tomatoes all throughout the month. And this is probably the last month you will see the tomato leaves are nice and green. August is one of the hottest months here in Southern California. By the end of August, you will see that the tomato leaves start yellowing a little bit. But you can see the harvest here, abundant harvest. And we were harvesting these kind of tomatoes almost every day. So going back to the foliage, the tomato leaves will turn yellow somewhere around end of August. So there are two options. What I usually do is I trim the leaves, all the dead leaves, the brown leaves. And this keeps the plant clean. It keeps it free from insects and diseases. You can see here the salsa tomato, beautiful looking tomatoes, large tomatoes. And since we planted the trellis on one side, I had to put my hand through the trellis to harvest some of these. But it's still doable. It's a very workable design. And the foliage will turn brown, as I mentioned, in late August. You will also see a lot of spider mites, aphids that attack your tomato plants during this time. So just make sure you do some preventative sprays using neem oil or the Dr. Earth insecticide that I've demoed before as well. And I'll provide links to some of these products in the video description and the comments below so you can buy them. But we kept harvesting these large tomatoes and they look quite awesome. These were some of the biggest tomatoes that you see here. And these tomatoes were just growing in a standard 4-pronged tomato cage. And when they grow over that height, they just fall over to the side and still keep producing the vines, which produce these amazing tomatoes. So all in all, this tomato season was very successful. I think we harvested a lot of tomatoes, especially in the months of June, July, and August. And I think we will continue to harvest more tomatoes in the month of September as well. I can see some tomatoes still producing on the plant. However, the volume of tomatoes that the plant is producing has gone down significantly by end of August. And you can see the tomatoes up close here. They look absolutely beautiful. Delicious tomatoes. One more thing we can do at the end of August is either start a new batch of tomatoes or just add a fresh round of fertilizer, whether you're doing granular fertilizer or liquid fertilizers like Epsom salt and some kind of balanced fertilizer for your tomatoes. This is a good time to do it. The plants have used up all the nutrients in the soil and will be soon hungry for more nutrients. And I usually harvest my produce in the morning, but there are times when I just go to my garden during lunchtime and then just harvest some tomatoes and use them right away. Once again, you can see one more harvest here, abundant harvest, quite a lot of tomatoes there. Moving on to cherry tomatoes. We also had our cherry tomatoes growing, and this is the Sweet 100 cherry tomatoes. And the tomatoes are not only very good, they taste very well in salads and just eating them raw, but they also stick to the plant very well. They don't fall down from the plant, which is also a very good characteristic of the Sweet 100 cherry tomato. Now we actually got tired of harvesting all these tomatoes one by one. It took us quite a while to harvest it. But you can see how prolific this tomato plant is. Both the Sweet 100 cherry tomato plants grew quite large and it sprawled almost the entire bed. So all in all, if you're planning to grow cherry tomatoes, this is a very nice tomato variety to grow. It will produce abundantly. It will give you a lot of tomatoes right throughout the growing season. And cherry tomatoes can also be grown in partial shade, as was discussed in our previous episode. And you can see here we've now started harvesting the cherry tomatoes in bunches. And while you might have a few that have not ripened completely, they will eventually ripen on the shelf. So don't be too concerned about harvesting some tomatoes that are not completely ripe. That's perfectly fine. But the tomatoes that ripen on the vine, they are probably the best tasting tomatoes. And if you get tired of harvesting all your cherry tomatoes, you can always delegate this work to little helpers. They are very happy to harvest these cherry tomatoes, and they do a good job at harvesting all the ripe ones very quickly. You can see the harvest here, it looks beautiful. And now let's look at the things for you to do in your garden this month, beginning with pruning. Now, while it's important to prune your tomato plants and pepper plants, eggplants, all your plants that have dried or brown leaves, it's also important to prune your basil plants. Now with basil, since you use mostly the leaves, it's a good idea to just remove all the flowers that come on the top, and that way the plant spends more energy in giving you more leaves, which is the edible part of the basil plant. Now you do want to leave some flowers on just for pollinators, but you can see here we have a lot of flowers growing in this one whiskey barrel that will attract a lot of pollinators. And now let's move on to sowing fall crop seeds. Now this is one of the most useful things I have, which is a thermal label printer, and I'll provide a link to this printer in the video description as well. But this helps me keep things very organized. I use these to label seeds, to label plants that I'm sowing. As you see here, I'm using some ice cream sticks and then sticking it on the ice cream stick to know what seeds I'm sowing. Now for the potting mix or the seed starting mix, I'm using a mix of fine cocoa coir and vermiculite. And this is one of the best mixes you can use. The cocoa coir is a very sustainable ingredient that you can use in your seed starting mix. And the vermiculite helps retain water, which is great for your seed starting. If you don't have cocoa coir, you can always use peat moss. And also add in some worm castings. I add about 10% to 20% worm castings, and this makes a huge difference in the way these seedlings will emerge and grow. The next step is to take a tray. I have used some kind of a plastic tray here just to keep all the seed starting cells, and then add the seed starting mix into these cells and then just push them a little bit. You don't have to push it too hard, but just enough to compact it so that you have enough volume of soil for the seeds to grow in. So once you do that, your seed starting cell is ready. And at this time, you don't have to add water. I'll show you how to moisten this seed starting mix as well. And then we do the same thing for the other seed starting cell. And this is a very fine mix for seed starting. You can do this yourself. You can make this yourself at home. You don't really need to buy those expensive seed starting mixes that are usually sold by a lot of gardening centers. Now, once you have your seed cells ready, your starting cells, as you see here, I usually will mist it with a little bit of water on the top just to get the process started, the process of water absorption. But bulk of the water will actually be under the seed starting cell, as you see here. We're just going to fill it up with water. And what will happen is that from the holes at the bottom of these seed starting cells, the seed starting mix will absorb all the water and then keep the seed starting medium evenly moist. And it takes about a couple of hours, after which you can see that the seed starting mix is moistened. And we now look at our tags, make sure that we are sowing the right seeds in the right place. And once that's done, we just put all the labels in the right places and then start sowing the seeds. And this is a good time to start sowing your cool season crops, because the cool season crop seedlings will take about 4 to 6 weeks to emerge. And by that time, it will be the fall season, during which you can transplant all these plants into your garden. Now, the next thing you can do is direct sow some seeds for some winter vegetables that don't like transplanting. So, for example, we are sowing radish seeds here. The reason we are sowing radish seeds is because radish is one plant that doesn't like to be transplanted, especially the long variety of radish, the winter radish. So all we're doing is we are sowing these seeds in our whiskey barrel container and they should germinate quite soon, and they take about 60 days to grow. Next up is carrots. We are sowing our carrot seeds in this whiskey barrel container as well. This is a new carrot variety we are trying out. And carrots have a very low germination rate, in my opinion, at least from the seeds that I have tried. So we sow a little extra and then we thin the seedlings out later. So we're just making some rows here, very simple rows of carrots, and we'll be sowing all our seeds here. Now the challenge with sowing carrot seeds during summer for a fall harvest is that the seedlings sometimes get burned by the sun because of the heat. And a good way to prevent that is to add some mulch, like straw mulch. Unfortunately, we don't have straw mulch in our area at least. I still need to find some sources that provide good straw mulch. But you can see here we have sowed our seeds and then we're just covering it up with the potting mix that we have. And that should hopefully be enough for these carrot seedlings to emerge. Now let's look at saving seeds. Our Nombo Giant okra is an heirloom variety. It's organically grown, and every year we save seeds. So this year, as you can see, we have a lot of okra that has dried on the stem, and we will be saving these okra seeds. So all we do is just take the dried okra and then remove the seeds. I'm using this container just to catch all the seeds. Now, although you can save seeds for heirloom varieties like this okra, you won't be able to do this for hybrid seeds. So just keep that in mind. Heirloom seeds like this Nombo Giant okra, which I have grown for many years now, saving seeds from every year's crop, are easy to save. And we have a seed packet here labeled for 2020. And then we just add all the seeds inside the seed packet. And these seeds will be viable for quite a few years. I have seeds that I've saved about 5 years ago that are still viable. They still grow very well. So all in all, it's a very good idea to save seeds for all your heirloom vegetables every year so that you have some in stock when you start your next season. So there we have it, folks. That was our episode on the California garden for the month of August. If you liked this video, do give us a thumbs up. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments box below. It's a good time to hit that subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber, and also the notification button so that you get all future updates. We'll see you again soon. Happy gardening!